Hello and welcome to Let's Collaborate, a podcast from the Southwest Doctoral Training Partnership. I'm your host, Catherine McDonald, and joining me for this episode is Wesam Wekhyan from the University of Bath. Now, Wesam's research is looking at approaches to social movement theory in Jordan. Tell us more about that, Wesam.
Thank you for the introduction. So my research is a study of critical decolonial approaches to social movement theory. What I noticed as an organizer before I started my PhD was that a lot of the work that was being done in the rural areas and on the grassroots level, a lot of that work was critical of institutionalized or colonial systems, as they argue, that are kind of carried down, or it's a legacy from past experiences with colonial presence in the region. An interesting thing that came up in my research, and I think really relevant to mention on this show, could be that there's one very prominent move in social movement theory, and that's renaming the region. So the region in the past was known as the MENA, Middle East and North Africa, whereas now a lot of decolonial scholars call it the SWANA, which it's an abbreviation, and it stands for Southwest Asia and North Africa, so SWANA. And my research is just looking at all of these organizations and these movements and these community leaders and the work that they've done, similar to the work that I did before my PhD, to challenge colonial systems. And these could include challenging policies that are implemented without taking into account indigenous or local experiences, their lived experiences.
And for a non-specialist listener, how would you define social movement?
That's an excellent question. And I get this question a lot from, and you'll see I'll say in the literature, it's quite split. You'll have a lot of perspectives that come from institutions where they would argue a social movement is actually just kind of like a period of time in which a lot of people argue or fight for a particular form of change, whether that's a social change or it's political or economic, as long as it's a shared ideal or value by mass groups of people. In the literature that I've noticed, social movement as a concept is challenged. So it's this idea that the way we understood social movements chronologically, right? So the study of the women's movement that is kind of like fit within a time frame, or the suffragette movement and the right for voting. And this is a very colonial approach to the study of a social movement. So to understand it within a period of time is quite problematic, because the argument stands that the organic human experience is the constant questioning of power dynamics and hegemonic institutions. So I guess from a decolonial perspective, a social movement would be an alternative approach or an alternative method to the way we understand the world. So epistemologically speaking, the way we know and how we know. But it's also the praxis, and it's the demand for looking at alternative ways of being as well. So that can be in a social movement and the way that we understand social movements, but that understanding of a different epistemic and practical approach is also decolonial in other regards. So not just within social movements, but it's also within, I've been looking at some of these sessions, biodiversity and biopiracy and the idea of the environment. And so that was maybe too much into other fields, but it's very much linked to our understanding of social movements from a decolonial perspective.
And what made you want to do this research? Am I right in thinking you've got a personal and a professional connection?
100%. And I am actually really interested in not just pursuing the research for the sake of a career in academia, because that is something that I've always been in academia, and I've always enjoyed this kind of exchange of knowledge. But I think the importance of an approach that is decolonial within an institution, or within any academic institution in the West, I think it's the recognition and the appreciation of alternative voices. And so I could definitely do research on social movements in general and just kind of do what a lot of academics have been doing in my field for years, and that's just kind of very prescriptive, very descriptive, and I just tell you what's been happening. I kind of put it within a time frame, very scientific, very logical in the way that we understand. But the indigenous approaches, or these kind of critical approaches, is so necessary. And I come from an indigenous community. I actually challenge the concept of whether or not my tribe is indigenous, but it is a community of people that have struggled to maintain their ways of life after the colonial presence of the British Mandate system in Jordan. And so, again, it's not only personal to me because of my work experience as a community organizer. It's not only important to me because I feel like decolonial approaches have such a they have such a wealth of knowledge to share, with the modern and Western-centric academia. But also I come from a community of people whose my grandmothers and my foremothers, their